So, Brian, the number one question I got from folks when I would mention that I was going to have you on today is folks asking me what the difference is between a mixologist and a bartender. So I'll ask you that question first. What is the difference between a mixologist and a bartender?
Well, for 20 years, I thought a mixologist was a bartender with a self-inflated ego. But we've seen really since the late 90s, early 2000s, that the best mixologists or the best bartenders in the world are emulating the great chefs, where they're sourcing local ingredients, freshest ingredients possible. They're doing spirits education to find the highest quality spirits. They're using flavor profiling to balance the acids and sugars and create original cocktails and recreate the classics to taste spot on perfect every time. It's an emerging culinary art form, and the term mixologist has kind of fallen into favor and has become so I always tell the average person the basic difference is a mixologist is to a bartender as a chef is to a cook.
I like it.
And that's it.
I like it. And if people want to check out your website, by the way, they can do so at mymixologist.com. There's a ton of great stuff on there. What makes you America's top mixologist? Is that self-proclaimed, or were you actually awarded that designation somewhere?
No, I did a little stint on the Food Network. I've done a lot of different projects with them, and one of their producers or whatever was putting up the sign and said, "Hey, we've got America's top mixologist." But I was formerly ranked number 2 in the world. I used to compete internationally, so somebody else gave me the title, and I use it in all my promotional materials. So,
well, who was the person that finished number 1 in the world?
Well, he was an Australian who was living in New York, but he's since moved on, and that was then, and there's been a lot of competition since then.
So if we wanted to be technical, I guess we should properly refer to you as the world's second greatest mixologist.
Well, now I can use that in my promotional material. Say Frank said I was number 2 in the world.
All right. Well, so tell me about the story with the Martini. I've seen now a whole bunch of articles all saying that the Martini is in the midst of a comeback. Is this just media hype, or is this real? Did the Martini really see a wane in its popularity, and is it now seeing a resurgence? What's your take?
Yeah, well, first of all, for those of us in the know, it's been coming back strong for a while now. But in very recent months, in the last year or two, we're seeing a huge resurgence in the mainstream and the middle of America. People are really getting turned on to it. And there's a number of different factors that have gone into resurging. One, of course, is television shows like Mad Men or Casino Royale or even American Psycho. People see people romanticizing the Martini, and that's exciting. But we're also seeing this huge flood of videos emerging on TikTok and on YouTube and other social media platforms, and we're seeing a lot of people, mixologists and bartenders, making these cocktails, and they're making them properly. And one of the reasons that the Martini declined for many years, ironically, is because of Ian Fleming and James Bond. And it's weird because he's often credited for popularizing the Martini, and it's really quite the opposite. Prior to 1960s, every bartender, actually, I should say prior to Prohibition in the 1920s, every bartender knew that you always stirred a Manhattan or a gin or vodka martini or old fashioned or Rob Roy. We knew those cocktails were always stirred because all the components were alcoholic, and we wanted to prevent it from being aerated. We want to prevent putting bubbles in there and keep those oily, creamy textures intact that coat the back of our tongue. And then Ian Fleming, not being a bartender, had his suave, debonair James Bond order his cocktail shaken, not stirred. And we aerated it. We compromised the integrities of the oils. And bartenders, after Prohibition, weren't properly trained on stirring. So they said, let's just shake it. And they would do it once or twice. And now you have these strong, rude things that were just so aggressive on the palate that nobody really enjoyed them.
You know, No, it's such a great point. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because when I discovered a stirred martini versus a shaken martini, I basically said, where have you been all my life? And I couldn't understand why anybody would get the shaken martini. But then I would order the stirred martini, and I'm a pretty pretentious guy, but it felt a little pretentious even for me to say, please give it to me stirred, not shaken. I think a lot of people like the look of that shaved ice at the top, and they like that it can get so cold so quickly. But in my view, there's no comparison. It should always be stirred.
Well, there's two things. First of all, once we add a mixer or a non-alcoholic component like olive brine, and you're making a dirty martini, you've compromised the integrity of that spirit, and you might as well shake it down and get those ice chips along the top. But mixologists hate those ice chips, because if we shake it down to the proper rate of dilution, those ice chips continue to melt in our cocktail and water it down. So a good bartender doesn't leave those ice chips on the cocktail. That first sip should be cold and inviting and perfectly balanced. Now, to your point, a good cocktail should be stirred. A good martini should always be stirred, and we want to take that alcohol from about 40% down to about 20 to 22%, just a little higher than a glass of wine. So you can taste you're drinking alcohol, but it's not kicking your butt. It just tastes delicious.
And if someone goes to a place where you're bartending or mixologizing, and they order a martini and they don't specify vodka or gin, or a specific type of vodka or gin, and they don't specify up or on the rocks, and they don't specify olives or a twist, they just said, hey, I'll take a martini. What do you then do? What's your de facto go-to methodology in making a martini?
Well, first of all, the de facto, you should never ask shaken or stirred. If the guest wants it shaken, they'll let you know, but the default should be stirred. Now the classic original martini was made from gin. In fact, it was 50% gin and 50% dry vermouth. And a lot of Americans turned off to that idea because vermouth is a fortified wine, and wine, once it's exposed to air, eventually becomes bitter and skunky. And we need to properly refrigerate and store our dry vermouth in a refrigerated unit. So if you're going to do that, if you get fresh vermouth, dry vermouth, a 50-50 is really quite a pleasant and delicious cocktail when properly stirred down.
Do people still serve it that way? Do you still serve it that way?
It's resurging right now. People are getting back into the 50-50. But for the last 40 years, people have been ordering it dry, extra dry, which means you just look at the vermouth bottle really hard.
Right.
Or you wave it over the glass. Traditionally, people just put a splash in, rinse it in, and splash it out. And that's because we're using dry vermouth that's been sitting in the rail for 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, and the less we use, the longer it sits out, and the more skunky and bitter it gets. We need fresh, dry vermouth.
Okay, so stirred, fresh, dry vermouth instead of vermouth that has been left out. You will, unless they specify dry, you'll give them a more generous serving of vermouth than what a lot of drinkers are doing. And then, I know you said the drink originated with gin. Do you make that their de facto, or do you then ask, do you want vodka or gin?
Well, great question. And my de facto is, I love converting people back to gin.
Me
because
too.
A lot of people out there listening have had a bad experience with gin and say, I don't drink gin. People don't know that gin and vodka are the exact same thing. The only difference is that gin is fortified with these botanicals, which give it flavor, and it's distilled to a slightly higher percentage of alcohol. But if we stir that down to the proper alcohol rate, no more or less than vodka, and now we shouldn't wince when we take that first sip. It tastes delicious, it's inviting, and it has lots of flavor to it. So my default is gin. And then a lemon twist, of course, if the guest wants olives, I want to have the best possible olives, and if you can buy them in the stores, get these bright green Castelvetrano Italian olives. Those are the best. They just taste phenomenal in a martini.
And the other thing, since you mentioned olives, that I've never understood is folks that, and I love cheese and I love gin and vodka, but I have never understood why anybody in the world would ask for blue cheese stuffed olives in the drink. I mean, to me, and I've tried it. It makes a drink taste greasy. I mean, to me, it's a waste of cheese and a waste of gin.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Ethanol is a solvent, just like water is, and your gin is at higher proof, cuts and breaks down all the oils in the cheese, and they tend to have an oil slick floating on top of your cocktail. I'm with you on that one. That started in Chicago. It became a thing. Here's my feeling about it. If you want to do blue cheese stuffed olives, some people just love it. Get a really good high quality. Don't buy the store bought ones. They're just terrible. You can go on Amazon and buy a little cheese injector and get a good Stilton blue or a creamy blue cheese, inject it into the olive, and go that route. It tastes better when you do it that way, but you're absolutely right. You're going to get that oil slick floating across the top.
Yeah, and we're talking with Brian Van Flandern. His website, if you want to check him out or check out some of his books, is mymixologist.com. Talking a little bit about the comeback of the Martini. I remember about 15 years ago, people were talking about the comeback of whiskey and scotch and spirits, brown spirits. Was that a real thing? Because to me, it seemed very real. 25 years ago, I don't remember people ordering a neat bourbon or a single malt scotch neat. Now, especially even among young people, you go to a bar and you see brown spirit after brown spirit. What was that real, number one, and what caused that, number two?
Well, it's definitely real, and the proof is in the numbers. You can just see that bourbon and, to a lesser degree, Scotch whiskeys have surged. The sales, the raw numbers across the board are just surging. A lot of that had to do with this new golden age of the cocktail. Part of being a great mixologist is doing spirits education and drilling down like a sommelier on the wines, really understanding the terroir, the distillation techniques, the aging practices, and what makes these spirits so special. Prior to the 90s and 80s and 70s, people just knew you get Dewar's. They had their favorites. I like Crown. I like Dewar's. I like whatever, and that's what they stuck with. They drank what they knew, and they knew what they loved, and that was it. Now people want that bespoke experience. They want to discover that thing that nobody else knows about and share it with their friends. And it's an affordable luxury experience.
Now, I was at a friend's the other day, and he poured me a glass of wine from a $12 bottle of wine, which I thought was delicious. And he said, you should do a segment on the best cheap wine and or the best cheap liquor. And I said, well, I'm actually fortunate enough to have a real expert on this front coming on with me. If you had to pick a liquor and or a wine that's not going to break your budget, but which is as good as any of these high-end brands, these name brands, these designer brands, what are a couple of inexpensive spirits or wines that you'd name?
I'm going to show one out there. If you've ever seen the movie Rocky, his cousin or whatever it is, the drunken bum uncle.
Paulie, right.
Paulie. I'm sorry. All you New Yorkers, they're out there cringing. They say, what are you doing? You can't remember Paulie's name.
Oh, no, it's the Philadelphians that you have angry at you now, not the New Yorkers.
Fair enough. That's true. So here's the deal. Paulie, in the middle of that movie, he pulls out a bottle of Four Roses and starts swigging off of it in the meat locker back there. And Four Roses had a great reputation prior to Prohibition, but they sold it after Prohibition was over in the 20s and 30s, and it became this rot gut swill. I mean, just horrible stuff they would sell to the bums under the bridges. They'd fortify it. It was like Mad Dog 2020 or Wild Irish Rose or some of these other. It's just terrible stuff. And then sometime in the 60s, I was brought by a Japanese company who decided they wanted to make great American whiskey. And they've been winning all kinds of awards for their single malt scotches. And so they made a phenomenal bourbon, but the damage had been done to the reputation, and so it's always been priced at a very reasonable price, but the quality of it is outstanding. There's a one example of a what's regarded as our parents thought that if you're drinking Four Roses, they would say, poor Frank, what happened to him? Where did he go wrong? But my recommendation is Four Roses is a great example of an inexpensive spirit that is phenomenally. Another one's Tito's. Everyone knows Tito's, cheap vodka made from corn, but it's distilled in a copper pot alembic still. And, it's really high quality. It's really very tasty for those who like vodka because the corn's naturally sweeter. And it's priced, it's inexpensive. It's good to go.
Have all the good cocktails already been invented?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Here's the beauty of it. When you understand flavor profiling, you know how to balance acids and sugars. There's a million acids out there, a million sugars, and then you've got every day there's new spirits being distilled. Even in the category of whiskey, people are experimenting and doing all kinds of crazy new things. So there's literally an infinite number of combinations, and there will never be another Cosmopolitan or Margarita because there's so many new things coming out there that there will never be that superstar cocktail again. But you'll find instead those cocktails, that superstar cocktail is specific to a specific venue.
I see. So we won't see something take off like a Manhattan again. Like there's no drink named for Staten Island. We won't see a Staten Island become the gold standard in bars all over the world.
Not unless I create it and you promote it. If we team up, we can make that happen.
I'm game. Now, the other issue I want to comment on out of Washington, and I'm going to look, I try every day, believe it or not, to avoid talking about the Ukraine-Russia war. One, because I don't know what else I can say. I've given you my 2 cents. I've tried to bring on a variety of opinion makers, especially people that are opinionated against what you hear on most of cable news. But when there's news, I have to bring it to you. And yesterday, the news came that Congress reached a deal on nearly $40 billion in this Ukraine aid package. Now, this deal was really remarkable for a few different levels. One, Congress once again demonstrated its eagerness to give Zelensky and the Ukrainians $7 billion more in war funding than President Biden requested. Think about that. So Congress once again says we're even more into war making than Joe Biden is, even though we're dealing with inflation, even though we're dealing with a real stock market concern. We're going to give the Ukrainians $7 billion more than Biden requested. Now, the interesting thing about this is, well, there are many interesting things about this whole thing. Not a single Democrat, which at one time was the anti-war party, not a single Democrat, not one in the House has any objection to dumping another $40 billion of untraceable high-grade weaponry into Ukraine, another blank check for continued U.S. military escalation with the country that controls the second largest nuclear stockpile in the world. Every one of them just voted for it. No questions asked. Now, I'm amazed that there were 57 Republicans that actually grew a pair and voted no. And you'll hear from some of them in just a second. But, I mentioned the other day that I went into a card store to buy my wife and my mom some cards for Mother's Day. And you couldn't buy an American flag lapel pin, but they were selling Ukrainian flag lapel pins. And you're not going to tell me that these Ukrainian flags flying all over the place, including places where you can't find an American flag, and all these Facebook profile photos that are all of a sudden the colors of the Ukrainian flag, those are more than just totally innocuous displays of solidarity. That certainly is contributing to this massive PR campaign that has now resulted in Congress ratcheting up the U.S. war commitment to the tune of another $40 billion. Now, it really is. Everyone says Washington can't do anything. Washington takes forever to get things done. How the two parties can't work together. It's really inspiring, quite frankly. And I think my friend Michael Tracy tweeted something similar. It is really inspiring how swiftly Congress can spring into action to pass billions of dollars of new war funding with this latest round sailing through the very minute they came back from recess, while funding most other things takes months, if not years, of painstaking deliberations. Or you want some funding for breast cancer? You want some funding for psoriasis? You want some funding for Alzheimer's disease? Oh, well, let's get a blue ribbon commission to see where that funding is going. Oh, but Zelensky wants $40 billion that we're going to have to borrow money to send him these weapons for? Yeah, oh, by all means, let's do it. Let's do it. It sails through the minute they come back from recess. How many of these congressmen do you think actually read this legislation giving the Ukrainians this weaponry against the country which controls the second largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world? That was a point made by Texas Republican Chip Roy yesterday. This is what he had to say.
We got a $40 billion bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't had a chance to review the bill. My staff is poring over the pages trying to see what's in it. You want to talk about the institution? You want to talk about standing up alongside Ukraine? Why don't we actually have a debate on the floor of the People's House instead of the garbage of getting a $40 billion bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, not paid for, without having any idea what's really in it, with a massive slush fund that goes to the State Department, $13 billion, $8 billion for the Economic Support Fund, $110 million for embassy security. We've got $40 billion that is unpaid for, and you want to sit here and lecture this body about what we're going to do or not do about standing alongside Ukraine? Why don't we talk about the American people who are hurting, the wide open borders, the inflation that's killing people, the jobs that people can't get because of the cost of goods and services in this country? Sitting here and being lectured to when I don't even have time to look at a $40 billion unpaid bill. I make a motion to adjourn.
I am so thankful that Congressman Roy said that. And whatever you think about Congressman Roy, I find it difficult to disagree with anything he said there. Let's rush through this bill that no one has read, that America has to borrow money to pay for at a time when we're dealing with still a pandemic, apparently, and inflation and a bunch of other things, including a stock market that's fallen like a rock, or at least going up and down like a roller coaster. And yet there are only 57 members of Congress that said, well, let's maybe not rush this through. Donald Trump Jr. made some similar points on social media, and he's being ridiculed for it. And I don't think he said it as well as Congressman Chip Roy did, but I found myself agreeing with many of the points that Donald Trump Jr. made as well.
Keep going. They don't care. You're paying for it. They get to reap the rewards. Yeah, but it's Russia's fault that we have an inflationary crisis, not the Ukraine, right? We have broken bridges, disastrous roads, homeless problems, a disaster at the border, right? It would have taken a couple billion, like $3 or $4 billion, to finish the border wall and stop a humanitarian crisis there. But no way, we can't do that. But let's send 10 times that, in addition to what they've already sent to the Ukraine. And maybe, just maybe if we're lucky, we can avoid nuclear war with Russia. Guys, to me, it reads as nothing other than Democrats trying to get their kickbacks in before they lose power. It's absolutely sick. Okay, and Joe Biden, don't tell the American people that inflation is your top priority when you're printing money out the wazoo to send it to this clown show. Enough is enough. Let's put America first. Let's maybe get baby formula for our children and our infants. Maybe let's turn our oil pumps back on instead of this insanity. But no, that's not going to happen. We all know it. Not while these idiots are in power.
I don't like calling anybody names, but aside from the fact that he used the term the Ukraine, which is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, I think Trump Jr. is exactly right. We need to be doing more to build up our own country. Not send $40 billion worth of weaponry to a country that is not a NATO ally, that I don't think you'd see lift a finger if America was attacked. That's my 2 cents. 800-848-WABC. Frank is in Morristown. Hello, Frank.
Hey, what's up, Frank? I was going to comment on the alien thing, but...
Well, comment on both. We got time. You could comment on both if you want.
Yeah, you were just talking about Ukraine. I feel like Ukraine seems like... I'm not saying nothing's happening there, but it almost seems like a wag the dog situation where they're just kind of using it as like stuff to put on TV so they could, and a lot of so they could obfuscate from all the other problems, and I feel like it's just a money laundering operation. Like you're sending money. Where is this money going? We have no idea. Yeah, like they don't show us every dollar, every penny where this is going. We have no clue. So I don't know. The whole thing's really sketchy to me. And Jimmy Dore always says like, "Oh, $20 billion." I don't know how true this is, but $20 billion would end homelessness or fix homelessness. I don't know how true that is, but I mean, now we're sending more than double that to Ukraine, which is absolutely insane. But the alien thing, I would say, one question I would ask is, have we ever retrieved anything, any, ships or whatever it possibly is? And another thing is, a question I would ask is it possible that these are interdimensional beings and not physical or not seen by our eye?
Those are two good questions, Frank. I'm going to disconnect you because your phone is a little crackly. Now, let me first deal with the Ukraine points that Frank made. One, I don't think the wag the dog comparison is an apt one. If you've seen the film Wag the Dog, it's a very good film. Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro, Willie Nelson. It's a very good film. But basically, the president in that film created a fake war for political gain. This war is not fake. People are losing their lives. They're losing their homes. That's real. That's real. The question is, Biden wanted $33 billion more for Ukraine. Congress quickly raised it to $40 billion. Now, think about what $1 billion would mean to anybody, to any person, any country, any city. That's real money. That is life-changing money for a lot of people. And now Congress basically just waved a magic wand on this bill no one voted on and upped it by $7 billion over what the president asked for. Who benefits? Tens of billions of dollars, and you could bet this is not going to be the end of it. It's soon going to be much more, are flying out of U.S. coffers to Ukraine as Americans suffer. As Trump mentioned, as Trip Roy mentioned, and as Frank in Morristown mentioned. So we see who really runs the government. Who's benefiting? Who's benefiting? February 26th, Biden approves $350 million in military aid for Ukraine. March 16th, Biden announces $800 million in military aid for Ukraine. March 30th, Ukraine to receive an additional $500 million in aid from the U.S. April 12th, U.S. announces $750 million more in weapons for Ukraine. May 6th, Biden announces new $150 million weapons package for Ukraine. And now we're giving them another $40 billion. Again, I feel bad that Ukraine has been invaded by a hostile country. It's just, I don't think this should be America's war. Those amounts by themselves, even before you put in the $40 billion, those amounts that I just listed are in excess of $3 billion. The total U.S. expenditure on the war in Ukraine was close to $14 billion through mid-March. And while some of that is earmarked for economic and humanitarian assistance, most of it goes into the coffers of the weapons industry, including Raytheon, whose board of directors the current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, sat immediately before being chosen by President Biden to run the Pentagon. As CNN put it, about $6.5 billion goes to the Department of Defense so it can deploy troops to the region and send defense equipment to Ukraine. So as enormous as those sums already are, they were dwarfed by the announcement that Biden made that he wanted to send an additional $33 billion. Congress said, we'll do you one better. We'll send $40 billion. Now, it's difficult to put into context just how much money that is, especially since this war is only 10 weeks old. Where are we going to be 10 weeks from now? We're going to give them another $80 billion? The amounts allocated thus far already exceed the average annual amount that the U.S. spent for its own war in Afghanistan. Think about that. The American taxpayers spent, this was after we were attacked on September 11th. Does anybody remember that? The longest war in American history, which resulted as a byproduct of September 11th, we spent $46 billion in Afghanistan. In a 20-year war, which ended only 8 months ago, there was at least some pretense of a self-defense rationale there. Now, the U.S. is spending more than that annual average after just 10 weeks of a war in Ukraine that nobody claims has any remote connection to American self-defense. Does that make any sense to you? And yet, when I point this out, and Chip Roy points this out, and Donald Trump Jr. points this out, and Marjorie Taylor Greene even points this out, we're the crazies. We're the crazies. Not the people trying to send $40 billion of your money to fight a country that hasn't attacked us. Even more amazingly, the total amount spent by the U.S. on this Russia-Ukraine war in less than 3 months is close to the Russia's total military budget for the entire year. While Washington depicts Russia as some sort of existential menace to the United States, the reality is the U.S. spends more than 10 times on its military what Russia spends on its military each year. This is crazy. Who's benefiting? Well, the military-industrial complex. And I know that whole tone has a conspiratorial bent to it, but that's who's benefiting. These billions of dollars are going right into the hands of military defense manufacturers and their lobbyists, and you can bet it's going to be used to do a lot of lobbying, to make a lot of contributions to the politicians that are making these decisions, and then when they finish their service, to give spots on the board of directors to people like Lloyd Austin and others. One of the interesting trends that I've noticed is what they are calling the Great Resignation. Have you been following this? Essentially, what the Great Resignation is what we're seeing right now in the workplace, which is a whole bunch of people quitting. And right now, the job turnover is 20% higher in the workplace now. And it's a very interesting workplace now. We're all remote, and we're in this hybrid working world, and it's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future, apparently. And companies should apparently brace for a lasting culture of quitting, of employees quitting. Listen to this. Some 37 million people will leave their jobs in the U.S. this year. 37 million. That is a 20% jump from pre-pandemic levels. A company that was seeing Zoom, so Zoom has now dominated the workplace and people are meeting by Zoom. I hate these Zoom meetings. I hate them. I did a Zoom meeting yesterday. It's the most annoying thing in the world. A company that was seeing a fifth of its workforce turnover annually before the pandemic, for example, can now expect to lose almost a quarter of its employees each year. Think about that. Brian Kropp, the chief of research for Gartner's HR practice, told Axios, this is for as far as the eye can see at this point. The Great Resignation, that's what they're calling it. People are going to be quitting their jobs or changing their jobs as far as the eye can see. As long as we're in this world of remote and hybrid work, and it's hard to see us getting out of it, that elevated level of turnover is going to stick with us. So what's happening? Flexible work means that the cost of leaving a job is far lower. One, workers have options. The companies eager to hire you aren't just the ones within commuting distance anymore. Remote work means that there are many more places to land if you quit. Additionally, this is an important point, and I find this true, but it's not something I would have thought of. Work friendships are weaker. Employees, according to this fellow, Brian Kropp, Employees pick a place to work not just for rational reasons like compensation or benefits, but emotional and social reasons like that's where my friends are. Remote and hybrid work weakens those connections as there's far less face time at the office, or sometimes none at all. So taking away work from anywhere is not an option for most companies. We've done that, and I'm very proud that our company's done that. You know what everyone does here? They come to work. But a lot of other employers aren't doing that. So taking away work from anywhere is not an option for most companies. 7 in 10 workers now think of work flexibility as something that they're not willing to do away with. Companies apparently are going to have to bring in more recruiters to handle these long-term load of open roles. And they'll have to build some redundancy into teams so that products and clients don't suffer from these turnover spikes. So I do wonder if it's possible to bring down this turnover rate of people quitting. How would you deal with the Great Resignation, which is apparently continuing without end? 800-848-9222. Additionally, there were two other semi-related items related to this, and I found it very interesting. One was a BBC story. Headline, How Remote Work Could Nix the Sick Day. You know, I've wondered about this. I mean, unless you're bedridden, unless you're dying, if you're not going into a physical office, why are you still taking sick days? You can't stumble your way to a computer screen or a telephone? Sick days used to mean resting, not working, but now more employees are logging in from home as they fight illness. After all, if people are remote already, why take the time off? You know how many sick days I've taken since we worked here? 0. Now, I did have a COVID exposure twice, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 days where I had to do the show from home. You know how many sick days I took at my last job, which I was at for 10 years? 0. I've just never gotten the, look, if you're sick, you should stay home. And I'm sure at my last job, there were some days where I came into work and I shouldn't have. And again, seeing where we are with COVID and spread of communicable diseases, you shouldn't do that. But these days, if you're working from home, is there really a need to take the sick day? Because before the pandemic, you had ill workers like me in that example that I just gave, showing up to the office, coughing, spluttering away as they tackled their workloads. Today, sick employees can work remotely, keeping their germs to themselves. But this shift raises a new dilemma for workers. Exactly how sick do you have to be to take a sick day from home? Before all this remote work, the choice was really binary. You either power through despite feeling lousy and go to the office, or you stay home and abandon work for the day. Now, that's not the case. Colds or flu, they could be bad, or they could be If you're don't you just work through it? So apparently it's a problem that could become more common as hybrid and remote work is spreading. Now, this is the last thing as it relates to the workplace that I want to bring to your attention. And this is, I find, the most troubling, but it's because of the same issues, which is you're not going into a workplace, you're not connecting with your manager, you're not connecting with your coworkers, and it's not leading to a sense of community like you used to have at the workplace. By the way, if you want to comment, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 open lines. Now's the time. 800-848-WABC. Are you familiar with the concept of ghosting? First of all, I find ghosting in any scenario to be incredibly rude to do to somebody. But the first time I heard the term ghosting, it was in the dating world. And I'm trying to think if I was ever ghosted. I'm sure I was, but I can't think of a specific example. But essentially, the term ghosting, as it was explained to me, and as I understand it, would be you go on a date with somebody, or maybe you meet somebody at a bar, and you like them, right? You go on a date, maybe 2 dates, and then you decide you don't like them. But you don't want to go through the whole rigmarole of breaking up with them. After all, it's early in your relationship. So what do? You just stop communicating. No return text messages, no return emails, no return phone calls. Done. That's what they call ghosting. And I'm trying to think if I've ever done that to someone. I don't think so. The closest thing that I've ever had with respect to ghosting was when I was in graduate school. I was going to graduate school at NYU, and I was pretty busy working here and doing other things. And essentially, I decided, rather than go through any formal process of dropping out, and I don't recommend this, by the way, but rather than go through any formal process of withdrawing from classes or matriculating or whatever, I just stopped going to class and stopped paying tuition. That was my version of graduate school ghosting. I don't recommend that at all. But now, it's one thing to ghost a bad date or a classmate that hits you up for an alumni donation. But these days, people are actually ignoring essentially communications from companies that have hired them for decent paying jobs. Can you imagine that? Big article in the Wall Street Journal about this week. So here is the most galling part, and this is what I find the most sickening part about this, to be honest. People are not even showing up for work on the first day. Think about that. They apply for a job, they get the job, they're hired, and then they just don't show up. Apparently, this is a real enough problem that employers are talking about this. So as this job boom continues, employers who are creating jobs and trying to fill existing ones will continue to be plagued by indifference, according to the WSJ, as John Batchelor would call it, from the generation that's responsible for this Great Resignation. Manufacturers, restaurants, airlines, and cleaning companies are among the employers seeing a surge of job seekers who accept positions and are neither seen nor heard from again. Listen to this. Southwest Airlines Company said that 15 to 20% of new hires for some jobs don't turn up on their first day. I am floored by that. Absolutely floored. It would never occur to me to do that. Apparently, in this tight labor market, employers reported that some staffers quit without giving notice. I would never do that either. You know, the last company that I was at before this one, I was there for 10 years. It was a difficult thing for me to quit, but I gave 2 weeks notice. And you know what? I tried as hard as I could to do my job as effectively as I could for 2 weeks. And I tried as hard as I could to prepare the next guy after I left. I can't imagine just quitting with no notice. And you know what? When I left here for the first time, when Curtis and I went to another radio station, I'll never forget. A friend of mine used to do this great show at night. It was on an internet TV network. And basically, it was a cocktail party masquerading as a TV show. And it was great. It was called Street Sense, but you'd have all these people getting together, getting drunk, and then debating politics. And it was a fun place to hang out at. And I was always, bummed because I worked nights at the time because Curtis's show was on at night. I was always bummed that I couldn't go down there for the show because I was busy at work. So I was there to drop off something at this studio for a friend of mine. And he said, well, why don't you just stick around? I said, no, I can't. I got to get back to work. He says, Frank, you have a job that you're quitting in 4 days. What do you care if you're a little late? And my attitude was, I don't care if it's my first day or my last day. You do the job as best you can every day. But apparently it's becoming common. This practice of just not showing up for your shift anymore, like I did at NYU, has now picked up its own shorthand. Employers are calling it, I've never heard this term before until this journal article, employers are calling it no call, no show. So more people are vanishing before even starting a job. Candidates evidently for jobs, according to Keith Wolf, who's a managing director at a recruiting firm, candidates have so many options in this job market that typical professional etiquette is being ignored. And I find that really disturbing. So, one, what do you think about this? What do you think? Does remote work mean the end of the modern sick day? 800-848-9222. Two, if you're an employer, how do you deal with the Great Resignation that's never ending? 800-848-WABC. Three, what is your view on more and more employees simply ghosting their employer? I got to tell you, I side with the worker over management on almost every single dispute. You go down the line, and if there's a dispute between labor and the people that control the means of production, just call me Karl Marx, because I am almost always with the labor people. But this is an area which I find absolutely inexcusable. No call, no show, just leaving, or worse yet, not even showing up. I couldn't live with myself if I did this. I'd be racked with guilt. Have you ever done this? And if you're an employer, have you ever experienced anyone doing this? So Casey White is a capital murder suspect who escaped from an Alabama jail last week. And evidently, he was aided in his escape by a correction officer, Vicky White, no relation. They just both happen to have the same name. And this very sad, this whole story came to an end this week when Vicky White, there was a police chase in Indiana, and it ended in a car crash. So the ex-corrections officer, who's accused of helping this guy escape from jail, Vicky White, 56 years old, was pronounced dead after, according to the murder suspect, Casey White, she killed herself. They were about to be apprehended, and she killed herself. So the U.S. Marshal Service said that when Casey White came out of the car, he exclaimed, "Please help my wife." He was referring to her as his wife. "Please help my wife. She just shot herself in the head, and I didn't do it." So while and they're going to do a full autopsy to see if that checks out, but all indications are she did kill herself. I find this story very bizarre. For starters, I mean, I know it can be difficult to meet somebody, to meet a guy if you're a woman and you're into the opposite sex. But I am perplexed at how often it seems that correction officers end up falling in love with the people that are in their custody. And I know some of these guys can be very charming. I'm sure some of them are very handsome. But this is what happened at Dannemora State Prison, at the Clinton Correctional Facility at Dannemora. The woman there, Tilly, she basically fell in love with two inmates there and helped them escape. Here in Brooklyn, at the MDC, cop killer Ronell Wilson impregnated one of his jailers. And I just think, what goes on in these women's heads? And I'm sure it goes on with male correction officers at female facilities as well. I know people are working a lot, and I know it could be difficult to meet someone. And look, I understand lust. I'm not excusing it, but I get it. Just sometimes your hormones get the better of you. I can understand, and I'm not condoning it, not excusing it, and it's as illegal as they come. But I can understand having sex with an inmate that you're guarding, that you're attracted to. Okay, I understand it. What I can't understand is being so brainwashed by one of these inmates that you're willing to risk your entire career and your freedom and life as you know it. And in the case of Vicky White, your whole life, literally, for helping out a murder suspect or anybody else for that matter. I just don't get it. And, you know, I've said this before, and this is politically as incorrect as can be. I've said this before. I think if I were in charge, and I'm sure this would require legislation, and I'm sure it's inappropriate, and it's certainly not PC, I don't think you should have correction officers of the opposite gender guarding inmates of the opposite gender. And look, I know that a woman can have sex with a woman and fall in love with a woman. I know that a man can do the same with a man. I think you'd see many fewer instances of this if you didn't have a bunch of guys who were deprived of female companionship staring at their female correction officer as if she's a boxed lunch when she comes down to do her rounds. And then I think you'd see many fewer instances of this. And I've believed that for years. Ever since that Ron L. Wilson, the cop killer, impregnated his jailer, I've always thought this was a recipe for disaster. And I think this is proven right again here. So give me your take on this. Maybe you think there's more to this than meets the eye here. What do you think? 800-848-WABC. It's a sad story because clearly this woman had issues. But I find this bizarre. This former correction officer, Vicky White, attractive-looking woman, 56 years old, relatively young, shoots herself in the head and dies after helping this inmate escape jail. I think it's a terrible story and a curious one. They had this jailhouse romance, but why would she do this? Why would she risk everything to help this man who's facing a murder charge and a 75-year jail sentence on other offenses? Maybe there's more to it. What do you think? 800-848-9222. Casey White told investigators that he and Vicky stopped in Evansville, Indiana to get their bearings straight and then figure out their next place to travel. They booked a hotel room for 2 weeks in the area. They have surveillance video from a car wash where they switched vehicles. And it's not clear if they were, in fact, married while they were fugitives, but he referred to her as his wife. So they at least considered themselves married. So the Vanderburgh County coroner did rule her death a suicide. So he apparently was ready to start shooting at the cops. But the fact that his car flipped over during the car chase prevented him from doing that. So there is dash cam video from the Evansville Police Department that's been released, and it shows several armed law enforcement officials dragging Casey White on the ground away from the flipped car. And the video shows them pinning White down before walking him handcuffed to a police car and holding him against it. But in the body camera footage of the first responders taking this woman, Vicky White, from the car, officers remove a gun from her hand before putting her out. It's a sad situation. I don't know. 800-848-9222 if you want to comment. On a much more upbeat note and a much less consequential note, have you heard the promo that we've been running? I actually think it's a pretty good promo. If you haven't heard it, because you listen to the podcast and they take out some of the commercials, this is the promo that I'm referring to.
Hey, did you know that people listen to people that listen to us? This is Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Now, I think it's pretty effective, and I think it's true. Now, I talked about how Obie Murray listens to this show on a regular basis, and so do a lot of people in government and other walks of life, okay? People listen to people that listen to us. Now, more than one person has remarked in the Facebook group, and if you want to join the Facebook group, you could do so, Morano Radio Fans and Haters on Facebook, just search that. More than one person has said that the promo should not say people listen to people that listen to us. Some folks have said that the promo should say, people listen to people who listen to us. So I got to tell you, I think that makes some sense. Doug Douglas was the first person to mention that in the Facebook group. So we're having a big meeting tomorrow night, more of a social meeting, but all the bigwigs from the station are going to be there. The program director, the president, I'm imagining John and Margot were going to be there. And I'm wondering if I should raise this. People listen to people that listen to us. That's what it says now. Should I say, hey, psst, I think it's supposed to be people listen to people who listen to us? Or if I do that, do I become the kid in class that says, oh, teacher, it's pronounced Arkansas, not Arkansas?
Answer 10 questions correctly in 1 minute, and you could win $1,000. Here's your host, Frank Morano.
Yes, let's meet today's contestant, Jay in the Poconos. Hello, Jay.
Good morning, Frank.
Do you live in the Poconos, Jay?
Yes, I do.
How do you like living over there?
I love it.
Oh, my Uncle Jimmy lived in the Poconos before he passed away. Did you know him at all?
No.
No, okay. All right. Well, he was quite a guy, let me tell you.
Back there, like 3 years ago, we used to live in Seattle.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, he had been gone, as of, I think, about 10 years ago now. Hard to believe. But you familiar with this game, Jay?
Yes, I hear it every morning.
Wonderful. Okay, I won't bother explaining the rules to you. I will just reiterate, don't get nervous, number one. Number two, the timer will begin after I ask the first question. And three, when you get a question right, we're just going to move on to the next question. Ready to go?
Yes.
All right. What is... Oh, excuse me. Let me rephrase that. Name a cereal.
Cheerios.
What is the biggest park in Manhattan?
Central Park.
Who was the voice of Darth Vader in Star Wars?
James Earl Jones.
What financial entity sets the prime interest rate?
The Fed.
What continent touches North America?
South America.
What annual horse race took place on Saturday?
Kentucky Derby.
Who is the owner of WABC?
John Katzmatidis.
What is the best-selling album of all time?
Michael Jackson Thriller.
Who was the last Russian Tsar?
Wait, that's a good one. Dmitri?
No, that's incorrect. We're out of time. Well, you got eight correct. You were doing really well. The last Russian Tsar was Nicholas II, but we would have even taken Nicholas.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, Jay, you did well. You answered 8 questions correct, so that entitles you under the John Katzmatidis rule, the person you correctly named, that entitles you to $100. Mike in New Jersey.
Good morning, Frank. Frank, the convict who escaped with his corrections officer girlfriend, was he a Svengali or a Svenjali?
He had a cheerful mental hold on her. You judge for yourself. Joe in Orange County.
How you doing, Frank? I just want to let you know you got to get pet insurance for your next pet. I spent at least $15,000 on my dog that passed away, and they took out the wrong organ.
Oh.
It was the left kidney. It was the right kidney that they took out.
Yeah.
My dog died anyway.
Oh, that's so sad, Joe. I want to be very clear. We have pet insurance for 2 of them, but we couldn't get it for the one that had a pre-existing condition. Jeff is in Elmont.
Frank, I have some advice for your wife, Rachel, when she goes on Newsmax. Why we have a shortage of the baby formula. Just blame it on Putin like the administration does with everything else.
That's actually very funny. I actually will tell her that. Teddy in Queens.
Dork is a tall nerd. Groundhog is a land beaver. And Egghead has no personality. Go Buchanan! Go Buchanan!
Jim in Brooklyn.
You know, I've been with you guys from day one, minute one, and it upsets me when our president has the nerve to conclude his speeches. May God protect our troops. May God protect our troops from him, Austin, Millie, these bunch of creatures. It's
Fred in Yonkers.
Hey, Frank, the other day I was at the mall. There was a couple on one of that electric staircases at the bottom, hugging and kissing. By the time they got to the top, they were throwing blows and choking each other out. Boy, did that escalate.
Jeff in Jersey City.
Frank, your dumbest interviewer will be Bill O'Reilly. He's still hating on Nixon while he loves the Kennedys. Joe Kennedy was a Nazi sympathizer. He stole millions of dollars from inside trading on the stock market. O'Reilly's a bigot. He calls
Eddie in Nassau County.
Gaunt, Klaatu, Arata, Necto. Let's go, Brandon.
And finally, Phyllis in Brooklyn.
Hi, Frank. I'm going to put a link in the Facebook group about hypothyroidism in cats. Sounds like something that you might be interested in related to your cat.
Thank you. Stay tuned for the WABC Early News and then the Bernie and Sid Show at 6 with Congressman Peter King coming up. Till tomorrow, Frank Moreno, good day.